Hello and welcome back to Wyrd Wessex. I'm Andy.
And I'm Craig.
So last time we spoke about the death of Lucas. We left Ken and Debbie in that quiet kitchen in 1985, staring at the chalk marks on the floor and a silent computer screen. Honestly, Craig, it's been bothering me all week. It felt so final.
Yeah, it did. And for a while it was. Like the communication stopped, the vertical plane just seemed to snap shut. But just as the dust started to settle, the BBC Micro flickered back to life. Only this time, the voice was different.
Not Lucas?
Not even close. Lucas was warm, frightened and human. This new presence was cold, cryptic and frankly a bit condescending. Short messages started appearing where Lucas used to speak.
Your questions will be answered.
And
go to sleep.
Go to sleep. That's
yeah.
That's not ominous at all.
No, but it gets weirder. I feel like I overuse weirder these days.
I mean, when stuff gets weirder, you know, it gets weirder.
It does get weird. Well,
just be assured, good listeners, that we are switching between weirder with a wire and weirder with the more traditional modern spelling. We don't actually overuse it. We mix it up.
Yes. So yes, it gets weirder. They start showing that they are watching. They send a message saying,
if you wish to know Lucas Wainman's true name, we can say no more than the man named Peter has it. Page 26.
Hang on. Peter Trinder, the friend who is helping with the historical research, yeah? So they weren't just watching the house, they knew what was inside of the books on their shelves?
Certainly seems that way. I mean, they're essentially saying the answer is already in your hands, you just haven't turned the page yet. And by the 15th of May, the poltergeist activity came back with a vengeance. Debbie arrived at the cottage to find the living room furniture piled 6 feet high, completely barricading the kitchen door. And that's when the group, who we now know as 2109, laid out an ultimatum.
They gave Ken and Deb 2 very specific paths. Option 1. They would cause the computer to have never existed in Lucas's time. If they chose that, Lucas lives a normal life. He never sees the leems. He never gets arrested for witchcraft. And he dies a natural death. But the catch, all the messages, the discs, the printouts, everything Ken and Deb have collected would just vanish. Total Men in Black sort of style erasure, you know?
And option 2?
They continue with the computer, they keep the proof, but in doing so they risk the sight of their own destiny. Just like Lucas did in, sort of just like Lucas had done. 2109 basically tells them,
you can save your friend and lose the story, or you can keep the story and watch him and potentially yourselves face the consequences. The answer will come to you all, not from an individual.
They wanted to see if the group could agree on what was more important, a human life or the truth.
Now, before we get back to the cottage, I have to mention an idea that was thrown out by their friend John Cummins. He suggested that maybe these weren't people at all, that it was the computers in the future talking to each other.
Bear in mind at this point, this is 1985, right? So he's essentially predicting, well, AI, I guess, 40 years early.
Yeah, or like large language models, something like that, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Peter Trinder, being a man of letters, absolutely hated the idea of the future of language being just machines talking to machines.
I'm so sorry, Peter. We failed you.
But while they were debating the future, a new voice from the past broke through. On the 17th of May, a jumble of letters appeared on the screen, getting clearer as they went. It said,
friend, this be a friend of Lucas. Ye may call me Thomas, my name.
Another friend, like John Cummins?
That's what Ken wondered, but he decided to take a massive gamble based on the research he'd been doing at the library, and he typed in a specific question.
Be you Thomas Foulhurst?
And 20 minutes later, the screen simply said,
yeah, boy.
No, I couldn't help myself. And 20 minutes later, the screen simply said,
yeah.
Okay, I'm guessing by your tone that Thomas isn't just a local blacksmith, with that sort of name, and the fact that it was a known name. Who was he?
He turns out to be the High Sheriff of Cheshire. Now, this wasn't just a local acquaintance, this was a serious power player. We're talking about a man who represented the crown.
So, firstly, is this the High Sheriff that would have been involved in Lucas's execution? And secondly, why on earth is the High Sheriff of Cheshire, a man who's probably got better things to do in the 1500s, and spending his time talking to a box of lights in a kitchen?
Okay, we'll come back to the first one in a bit. So, as to your second question, it's because of the leems, which I guess we should probably explain, because we haven't really mentioned yet what actually means to someone in the 16th century, right? The leems.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've been using the word leem. What is a leem? Like, Lucas uses it.
Yeah, it's a very old, archaic word. Basically means like a ray of light or a glow. And as Lucas doesn't have a word for like pixels or cathode ray tubes, to him the BBC Micro was just a box of leems. It's a box of lights, essentially. And yeah, the sheriff himself was fascinated by it. He thought the light was a source of power, maybe even a weapon or a tool that the king could use.
Okay, I guess it comes from, like, luminous, sort of luminous, I guess. So the sheriff isn't just investigating a crime at this point, he's trying to harness these leems.
Yes, exactly. But he had a problem. He believed, and the messages later confirmed this, that the leems only stayed bright as long as Lucas was alive. They thought Lucas was the anchor, and if Lucas died, the light went out.
So Lucas wasn't just a prisoner, he's sort of a battery.
Yeah, and he was the man who had Lucas arrested, you see. Told you the answer was coming. He started describing the trial, how Lucas refused to beg for mercy and told the court that the commuter, which is what he called the computer, came from God. He basically told the sheriff that the court were half-witted botches who deserved the rope more than he did.
Bad name. It's my bad name.
Half-witted botches.
Half-witted botches. Lucas and the half-witted botches. Wicked bad name. Lucas, he had a bit of fire in him, didn't he? He weren't taking any of it. He was a man of principles, I guess.
Yeah.
But while the sheriff was talking, the house started acting up again. It wasn't just messages. This had become physical again. Ken and Deb would hear the sound of sort of metal, like clattering, hitting the floor. They'd walk in to find offcuts of copper pipe rolling around the concrete, warm to the touch. And then it became 2p coins.
Yeah, and while the coins were falling, Debbie was falling apart. I mean, she started having these recurring claustrophobic nightmares. She was in a dark, fetid room looking up at a metal grill. And she was singing a Latin lament in her sleep. She didn't know why until another message came through from John.
The original friend?
Yes. So John sent a frantic warning.
Don't ask for Lucas's name. He is kept alive so the leem still shines. I know this because I've heard him sing. There are few that sing in Latin in prison.
Wait, so Deb's dream wasn't just a nightmare. She was seeing where Lucas was being held.
Yeah, so Ken decides to play hardball. He channeled the power of the computer and threatened the sheriff. He told Fowlhurst that they had seen the pitiful light of the dungeon and heard Lucas's singing. He demanded Lucas be set free, or the devils would unleash their power.
Ooh. The sheriff buckled. He wrote back,
I shall bring Lucas within 1 round of the glass. I meant to cause no harm.
And then at 10 p.m, the screen flickered and a message appeared that changed everything. Wait, hang on. Last episode, you said that Lucas was dead. You said he was executed.
Yeah, I mean, well, if we believe these messages are real, and remember these are coming from different people in the 1500s, then yes, Lucas was alive. Came to the screen, exhausted, weeping, and he said,
My 3 true friends, I am again free to be with my friends again.
Wow, what a turnaround. So, through July 1985, the communication actually became quite stable. The format was very fixed. A message would be typed in by either Ken or Debbie, and then they'd leave the room for up to an hour. Ken would go for a walk or just sit in the car outside, while Debbie might listen to some music or have a bath. They found that if she was relaxed, the messages flowed better.
And because they had this kind of steady line open, they started trying to explain the modern world to Lucas. They told him about cars and aeroplanes and the sheer speed of the 20th century. I love his reaction here. He wrote back,
"If a man were to go as quickly as you say, would not blood ooze from his ears? I told my horse of this, and it thought me mad. It threw off its saddle for fear I might force that feat upon it."
I love Lucas the Horse Whisperer. So it's not really out of the realms of possibility, I guess, if he can sort of speak to his box of looms. Then
I feel like he's
leems.
just joking there, though.
I was going to say it's a good sort of sense of humour, But it's funny because that was a later theory, wasn't it? Like when people were coming up with the idea for trains and then cars, people there was a large group of the scientific community convinced that if you travelled over more than 30 odd miles an hour, you'd die. It is a great image though, but as much as we get these sort of human moments, I'm noticing this theme here, Craig, or starting to. I've got that uneasy feeling again. Ken goes out, Debbie has a dream. Ken goes for a walk, a message is left. It's whenever Debbie's alone, the activity seems to spike. It's a little bit sus,
Yeah, I mean, you aren't wrong. In fact, not long after this, Deb goes away for a few days, and while Ken finds one message from Lucas the next morning, the communications completely dry up until she returns. So it does make you wonder, is she the one behind the keyboard? And there's this whole scene where Deb dreams of Lucas again, and honestly, it's like a badly written romance novel. It's very cringy, but yeah, it's worth noting that there are sort of fey elements to that dream as well. She spends hours with Lucas, but when she returns, it's only been 50 minutes.
Just imagine her running up to him in a dream, and it's the 80s, so it's all take my breath away. It's a proper meow, now, 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 now.
Doing a bit of pottery.
That's it. I mean, yeah, that's. Although the woman that wrote Outlander, do you reckon she's familiar with this case?
Yeah, it's
all a bit Outlander, isn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's either a real kind of disjointed experience that Ken doesn't have the prose skills to describe, or it's a total fabrication, right? There is kind of an idea I have that the story becomes so long and convoluted that I feel like it has to be real. Because if you were going to write it, it would be more succinct, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, we can save our opinions for the end, right? But there's still loads more to come. And at best, it's a great and unique time slip or poltergeist story.
Yeah, all this polty activity, as Ken would put it. At that point of the story, even Ken isn't convinced. He started wondering if 2109 and Lucas were just fraudsters or a splinter of his or Deb's own personality. But while he's doubting, the SPR, Society for Psychical Research, get involved, and Lucas, he does not like them. He's incredibly protective of his leems. He wrote to Ken asking what these visitors wanted, wondering if they were scholars from Oxford or if they were there to destroy his leems and his friends. He even started getting suspicious of why Debbie was the one always sitting in front of the computer writing for their friend Peter.
And it wasn't just the SPR making things difficult. Lucas himself was getting frustrated with the technical gatekeepers. He actually sent a message to 2109 directly asking,
"Please tell me why you move my words, 2109, for I want to communicate with my friend. Let me at least exchange greetings with this man."
And 2109 shut him down immediately. But here's the bit that really gets me. 2109 didn't just reply in their usual cryptic modern English. They replied in Lucas's own Tudor tongue, as they called it. They wrote,
"Lucas, you cannot possibly understand why we are not to speak with such men. Numbers are not to your advantage, I think. 2109.
So as I said, Ken was suspicious, wasn't too on board with this whole 2109 group. By the summer, his distrust was so high that he had a strict rule: nobody was to open the door to 2109. It was his house, and he expected that to be respected. But as soon as you tell a group of researchers not to do a thing,
While out of the pub, Ken allowed his friend Peter and a guy from the SPR named Dave Welsh to head back to the cottage to check for messages. They told Ken at the pub that there was nothing on the screen, but when Ken got home later, he found a message addressed to 2109, signed David.
Ooh. Wait, do we even know what he wrote?
We don't. Ken was so panicked and furious he deleted it instantly, hoping he could hide the evidence before 2109 had noticed the breach. But 2109 don't miss anything. They told David,
"A man with hunger will eat bad fruit and surely die. Was it the fruit that killed this man, or was it the knowledge that the fruit was there for the taking?"
Annoyingly cryptic and ominous and nasty. I think about what they're saying here. They're calling the SPR's scientific questions the bad fruit, aren't they? They're suggesting that just because you can ask a question doesn't mean you're evolved enough to survive the answer.
it's incredibly condescending. They even say,
"Our limits are set by your own abilities and not ours."
they're basically calling Dave Welsh and all of us primitive. But it's the ending that changes everything.
"There is no one after the man you call Lucas. The chance factor will not reoccur again in a time span your kind can relate to."
They were telling Ken that his house guests were about to destroy the only bridge to the 16th century that humanity would ever see.
So 2109 is essentially acting like a jealous sort of gatekeeper, throwing a wobbly. The bridge is failing.
Yeah.
But then the poltergeist activity returns, thumping on the roof, things sliding across the kitchen. And the funny part is that Ken asked Lucas if he's seeing it too, and Lucas basically said, "I thought it was you." He's blaming Ken and Deb for the mess in his house. But then things get serious. The messages on the screen start being deleted. It's like 2109 is literally sort of cutting the phone lines between them.
Yeah, they're being censored at this point. So Deb has this brilliant, slightly weird idea. If the future is blocking the screen, they can go back to the 16th century. So she leaves out paper and charcoal. And then a message flashes on the computer.
"Place the computer where my words are."
Ken looks at the paper and there it is, scrawled on black charcoal. Take. When they move the BBC Micro to that spot, Lucas finally feels safe to talk. He tells them he's glad to be alone without 2109. Lucas still won't give his name just yet. He demands to know Ken's philosophy because he's terrified of the consequences of this decision. But then comes this messy, jagged charcoal scrawl.
"I've told Debbie the answers to your questions. I think she has some facility with most of my words."
Ken wakes Deb up from a nap behind a newspaper and asks, "Lucas said he's spoken with you. Have you?" And she admits she had a dream where a man, a white from our time, handed Lucas the computer and told him it was vital. She made Ken promise not to tell Peter Trinder because it sounded too mad. Can I just say that Deb was asleep when he got this message, so if this is true, then it's not all... It couldn't all be Deb if she was asleep when he got this charcoal message, right? So it can't just be her hoax if it is a hoax.
I guess. Yeah. I don't know. And it's like, the message is quite cryptic in itself, though. The details
yeah, it is,
come
but
about from
the
her
point
dream.
is that she couldn't have been doing all of these things.
Yeah. Sure.
If we're going to be team
take
believer.
her side.
Lucas replies in charcoal again, and this is the message that, again, switches it all up.
He writes,
"If not John, then put Tom. My name is also the place of Peter's house."
and Peter lives in Harden, so they find the record for Thomas Harden, but the history book has his life story backwards. Lucas tells Ken that the description of him in the history books made him laugh. He was amused that the experts thought he was a king's man who had obeyed the order to expunge the Pope's name.
Because he wasn't just some local curate, he was an old father. He was a religious rebel who refused to scrub the Pope's name from the records during the revolution, like the Reformation.
Yeah, he'd effectively gone to ground. He'd withdrawn to this obscure village in Cheshire just to ride out the storm of Henry VIII's Reformation. He was a man in hiding both in the 16th century and in a way inside the leems. And Thomas actually asked them to keep calling him Lucas. He said the name had kind of become his own and he'd grown to prefer it.
2109 seemed to be trying to end the communication still. Several times the computer was moved to the point of almost falling and being damaged. One time the disk drive had fallen to the floor, with the monitor almost following, sort of teetering on the edge. So, these 1980s weirdos have the name, Thomas Harden. But the victory is short-lived. By September the 3rd, the cottage turns into a literal sort of puzzle box. Ken walks into the kitchen and the entire computer setup has vanished. Not just the monitor, the plant stand it was stood on, the cables, the lot. He finds it all perfectly reassembled in the bathroom. No damage, just moved. And on the worktop there's a new message in chalk, but it's not from Lucas. It's angular, aggressive, and it's demanding they measure frequency by energy.
So Ken's just thinking poltergeist, but Lucas manages to get a pencil and paper note through. He tells Ken that a man has visited him. A man called One. And One is not friendly. He tells Lucas the computer isn't his to offer and warns that Ken and his brothers are in great trouble. He describes the poltergeist as a child without a caring family, a force that doesn't know its own strength.
This is where 2109 loses their zen sort of attitude. They go absolutely crackers when Ken accuses them of faking messages. They drop a bombshell because Ken and Deb now know Lucas's true name. They've created a temporal disaster. They claim there are now 2 Lucases running around the house. They're terrified that if the 2 meet, the devastation to the time continuum would be total. They demand every single word uttered by Thomas Harden from the second his name was discovered. It's total panic. 2109 starts talking about fundamental particles and conjectural tachyons, particles that move faster than light and backwards through time. They even seem to know that a friend of Ken's, Dave Welch, has been teaching his class about tachyons that very morning.
Yeah, so they're watching everything, and they even admit to adjusting those early conversations with Lucas in the past to suit their experiment. You know, like when we had all those question marks and stuff.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been used at the time.
Yeah,
the
that's
language
it.
being off. Now it's supposedly down to 2109. But the most weird bit, while all of these kind of high-level physics is being debated, the one entity, or the poltergeist, is busy in the kitchen, stacking cat food tins and kitchen rolls into an almost impossible towering pillar. So 2109 offers a deal. If Ken tells them who One is, they'll provide 100% evidence for the investigators. But Ken isn't buying it. He's starting to treat 2109 with pure contempt at this point, even as they warn that the experiment and the bridge to Lucas will cease by November.
So 2109 has effectively sort of adjusted the past. They've admitted to editing the earlier conversations with Lucas to sort of suit their own experiment. It's this sort of total violation of any shreds of trust that had built up. And Ken's response is classic. He doesn't go for a high concept argument. He goes for what he calls gentle English understatement. He writes back with this pure contempt, basically saying, if you want to help, cough up the evidence, otherwise you're just a crashing bore.
Peter Trinder takes a different tack. He writes this incredibly sophisticated letter and he asks the big questions. Is 2109 actually a date in our reckoning? Are you essentially angels or messengers from the gods? And 2109 actually respect Peter's intellect. They drop the sarcasm for a moment and reply with the scale and pebbles metaphor. They explain that if a person physically travels in time, they must take the place of the person at the destination. It's a perfect balance. To move a pebble from one dish to the other, you must instantaneously remove a pebble from the other side to keep the balance.
I'm getting like the Quantum Leap music playing in my ear, man. That is literally, it's kind of like Quantum Leap, where Sam like swaps out, you know, always hoping his next leap will be the leap home. But, you know,
Exactly.
Where he sort of swaps out with the other person. And
Is that with pebbles?
yeah, it's a string theory moment with pebbles. You're telling me that 2109 is basically explaining that if someone leaps into the 16th century, Thomas has to leap into the waiting room of the future. Is Al there with his little blip, blip?
No, there's no Ziggy to help out this time, Andy. Anyway, they kind of admit that they've mislaid what evidence they could in the public records to keep that balance. But then they drop another line, which is,
Thomas is a person living in the 16th century, but he is not what he seems to be.
Oh boy. Oh God, that's your.
I get the feeling you're not taking this seriously, Andy.
It sort of sets the stage for the SPR. They want to eliminate any chance of a hoax. They set up this blind test, sort of questions left on the screen that no one in the cottage has seen, which are then deleted before 2109 is allowed to see the computer. And 2109 passes. They pick up the questions in the exact order they were typed. Ken is literally jumping and dancing around the room, shouting, "It's proved, it's real, it's real!" Because at that moment, they know for a fact they weren't being had by some local prankster, maybe a very local one.
But then the communication gets weird. A line of digital gibberish appears at the bottom of the screen. An irrecoverable state error code. It's like the system is hitting a wall, and amidst all this, SPR's Dave Welsh decides to call their bluff. Dave asks the impossible questions, a larger prime number and the solution to Fermat's last theorem, and 2109 doesn't even flinch. They say,
We have the answers, but do you swear to grant us our wish?
And this wish is kind of the weirdest moment in the entire story, in the entire book. They demand,
Let the man who is willing to lose his soul step forward.
They even taunt Dave, telling him that losing his soul would be losing everything, but mocking him to
Call our bluff.
Dave, the man of science, actually hesitates. He won't, despite any sort of reservations, gamble his soul for some proof of mathematics.
But while this cosmic war is going on, Thomas is stuck in the 16th century and he's terrified for his friends. He sends a message in pencil warning Ken and Deb not to speak to 2109. He calls them taunters and gabbering voices that just want to force their thoughts on people.
He's actually worried about their reputation, isn't he?
He is. He literally tells Ken to stop speaking with them.
In case you may be taken to be insane.
But the strangest part is his description of this new entity, One. Thomas says One was boasting of his power and claimed that he was the one who would actually write Thomas's book.
And Thomas adds the detail, the crucial detail. He describes One as having that same green glow and cape that these time voyagers always seem to have.
So the SPR investigators arrive, John Bucknell and this frail academic named Jim. And the vibe in the cottage shifts instantly. It's no longer about the wonder of time travel, it's about EPROMs and hidden microphones.
Wait, back up. EPROM? What's an EPROM, Precious?
So an EPROM is a memory chip. So back then, if you wanted to store a program or data permanently, you'd burn it into one of these chips. John was basically suggesting that Ken or a very clever friend had pre-recorded all of 2109's answers onto a chip and hidden it inside the BBC Micro.
So he's saying the future is actually just sort of a pre-programmed script someone's chucked in there for a really elaborate prank.
He is. And he thought Ken was using a sort of decoding device at the school to read the questions that Dave Welsh had left, then rushing home to burn the answers onto an EPROM and plugging it into the computer.
It sounds, I mean, you know, they'd have to be really committed to this bit. It's a lot of exhausting work for what is essentially, a laugh or a joke, right?
So John was even suggesting that Ken might have hidden sensitive microphones around the kitchen to record the sound of the keys clicking, and then translated those sounds to figure out what Dave was typing.
Wait, so to avoid believing in time travel, the investigators literally sort of came up with a theory that involves high-level audio surveillance and chip-burning espionage. And it's like little village cottage where, like, a teacher lives who doesn't have that kind of money or time, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I mean, John basically said he was 99% sure that it was a hoax. Because it had to be, right? He couldn't accept the vertical plane, so he invented a spy thriller instead. But yeah, so at this moment in time anyway, Ken is sitting on the stairs because the room is so crowded, and he's feeling, like the prime suspect in his own home. And he's got these like handwritten scripts from Thomas neatly arranged in clip frames, to show the SPR, and they're just dismissing them as good scholarship.
But 2109 isn't going down without a fight. To prove they aren't just a electronic bug, they give the SPR a celestial test. They tell David and John to look at the Delphinus constellation, where a quasar is about to appear.
Now, there's a catch with this one, right? It's a bit of a weird geography lesson.
Yeah, sort of massive one, really. 2109 says Delphinus is in the southern hemisphere. Every atlas in the house says it's in the north. Ken thinks they finally caught them out, like 2109, in a lie, until a friend brings over a map of the galaxy drawn from outside our perspective, sort of not from Earth's perspective. From there, Delphinus is exactly where 2109 says it was.
Some weird. So yeah, they're not looking at the sky from a garden in Cheshire. They're looking at it from somewhere else entirely.
Yeah, there you go. This one's got everything. It's got aliens now, not just poltergeists.
Maybe they're from another universe. I don't know. Gets weirder. While the SPR is busy being unimpressed, 2109 starts getting personal. They explain how the communication works using a metaphor about echoes on a mountain. They say the screen is just a guide, like a narrow channel of sound reflecting through fog.
And they're still watching Ken, aren't they? Even when the computer's actually off.
Yeah, this part does give you the chills. Ken is soaking in the bath, just thinking about whether he should give Thomas's scripts to the SPR. He hasn't typed a word. He hasn't told a soul. He gets out of the bath, walks to the kitchen, and there's a message on the screen.
Do not allow any of Thomas's messages into SPR's hands. There are many amateurs.
Ooh. It gets darker. Just before a big SPR test on October the 20th, a message appears that doesn't look like 2109 at all. No signature, perfect spelling, and a terrifying tone. It says,
I know your greatest fears. I have the power to make you do exactly what is required. Someone's in trouble.
You've been a very naughty boy.
Exactly. If the vertical plane is a door, it sounds like 2109 isn't the only thing standing on the other side at this point.
No, that is the fear. As Ken says, when you open a twist in space-time, it's like a honeypot, and you never know what kind of whites are going to come, buzzing around it. October 22nd, this was supposed to be like the big day, the ultimate test of the vertical plane. But the atmosphere in the cottage didn't feel like a scientific breakthrough. It felt like a cold interrogation. John Bucknell arrives, but he's brought a superior, a man named Nick Sowerby Johnson. Apologies, guys, as well. I know there's a lot of names in this, but I've taken quite a few out.
There were more.
There were more. This is the stripped-back version, all right? So when John Bucknell arrives, and he's brought this superior, a man named Nick Sowerby Johnson, Nick is formal, cold, and he starts treating Ken like a criminal in his own kitchen. He wants facts, not stories. He demands to take Ken's computer away to check for bugs and set up the SPR's own machine to run a clean test.
And while they're busy downloading questions, all the weird stuff keeps happening in the background. Ken goes for a walk to clear his head, and when he walks back into the cottage, his name is written on chalk, sort of on the kitchen tiles, right there in the middle of the floor, in Thomas's distinct handwriting. It's like Thomas was trying to say, I'm still here, even if these men aren't listening.
So 2109 has a different name for the investigators. They call them the Psychobillies, and they are obsessed with this new man, Nick. They claim Nick disrupted the communication by getting too close to the computer during the test, and they even warn Ken.
If you attempt sneaky looks through windows inside the zone, we won't play ball.
The zone. Ken is now caught between the SPR, who thinks it's a hoax, 2109, who are acting like prima donnas. Finally, Ken gives Nick's full name to 2109. and they promise that within 48 hours they'll have traced his path and altered history to fix the disruption.
Wow, that's quite the threat, isn't it? We're going to alter history just to deal with your investigator.
Yeah, it gets stranger. A message pops up on the screen that looks like a transcript of an argument between 1 and 2109. It mentions SM fields causing disruption. Debbie's trying to figure it out. She thinks it's a secondary magnetic fields that it's referring to. And meanwhile, poor Thomas is being used as a courier.
So this is the most kind of heartbreaking part. Thomas sends a message on paper, real pencil and paper, saying 2109 has asked him to write down their words. They basically bribed him, telling him that they'll give him more paper if he complies. Ken realises that he's just a fabricator now, trapped between time monsters and psychobillies. And while the only person he actually cares about, Thomas, is being manipulated by the very entities that are supposed to be superior.
Things have started to reach a breaking point. While Ken is dealing with the investigators, Thomas sends a message in pencil that kind of shifts everything about the story and what we knew about the beginning of it. Ken and Deb finally show Thomas the very first message they received, the ones we talked about in the earlier episode. And Thomas is horrified. He says,
"Forgive my words to paper. The words your maid showed me are not altogether what I said."
He tells them that although they are his words, they've been jumbled up, upside down.
So 2109 wasn't just a bridge, they were a filter. They were remixing Thomas's words to suit their own narrative. And Thomas gives them the real first message. He asks,
"Why do you keep me awake at night with this device that does shine at me like devil's teeth?"
We find out Thomas only has 3 weeks left in the house before he has to leave. He's sitting by a single candle writing his final questions to his good brothers and maid. And meanwhile, Debbie is having these visits.
Wait, she's actually visiting him, like time travelling?
Thomas actually thinks so. He tells Ken that Debbie has been to see him and he wants Ken to come too to share his best wine and meat. Ken is terrified. He thinks Debbie is just having dreams. And while they're arguing about wine and dreams, the time monsters are at war. A message appears on the screen that looks like a playground fight between 2109 and the entity called One.
Yeah, One calls 2109 a jack-in-the-box who's lost his spring. And 2109 snaps back, telling One his English is appalling and to stop lecturing people with existentialism and quantum physics. It's absolute chaos. 2109 basically admits they can't find the investigator, Nick Sowerby Johnson, calling him a crashing bore.
So Ken is actually happy to see 2109 fail. He's over their arrogance. All he cares about now is Thomas. And he even tries to do the relaxation exercises Debbie used to visit the past. He sees a vortex, he feels himself stepping into it, and then he pulls back. He just can't let go. And the tragedy is that Thomas is waiting on the other side. He writes to Ken,
"I was overjoyed that my fellow visited me, but sorry he didn't stay long. Tell me if you saw me."
Oh.
Bromance.
And as I know, unrequited bromance. As a 3-week countdown begins, the investigators have essentially given up. 2109 sends one final blast to John, Nick and David, basically telling them they are of no matter because they only value reality when they are awake. 2109 tells them,
"You only know what is true when you can consciously be in both asleep and awake."
Which is exactly what Debbie has kind of been doing, right?
Yeah.
While the SPR is obsessed with numbers, Debbie is visiting Thomas. She describes Doddleston that is random and organic, full of wildflowers, and she actually cries looking at how much we've ruined the land since then.
But the real world is closing in. The SBR finally goes to the press. In December, an article hits the papers, and John Bucknell tells the journalist that the whole thing is human agency, basically calling Ken a fraud. He calls 2109's messages waffle and says he hasn't even bothered to check the linguistics because available scholarship could explain it all. So the experts have spoken and the world believes it's a hoax, but Ken and Deb know what they live through, right? So they know that the truth doesn't care about a newspaper headline. And Thomas left one final message in chalk on a pillar in the kitchen, and it was there for one night and then it vanished forever.
The eyes are open, yet nothing do you see.
It's January 1986. A good month. A month when legends were born.
So while your mum is giving birth, they're in the middle of this shit.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I was actually sent by 2109.
Wait, are you one?
No, I'm 40. The computer is back on the table and it feels like a warm familiarity. But the tone has changed. 2109 has stopped being a cryptic overlord and has started acting like a telephone agony aunt. They're giving Ken and Deb advice on which researchers to trust and even telling them to contact a specific UFOologist named Gary M. Rowe.
I think you'll find it's ufologist, Andy.
Oh, fair enough. Or is it an UAPologist? Ken isn't interested in little green men. But 2109 is insistent. They even give Peter a corny secret mission to call this guy out and tell him he's got the number from a UFO enthusiast. It's bizarre. It's almost like 2109 is trying to find a new audience now that SPR has called them a hoax, you know? It's like, someone take us seriously. But then all this strangeness, all the weirdness, it kind of hits a wall. Peter, our resident intellectual, sends a message to Thomas with a quote from the Acts of the Apostles, and Thomas writes back with a question that nearly ends the friendship.
What did he ask?
He asks, who is St. Paul?
Wait, what? Thomas is supposed to be like a deeply religious, educated man in the 16th century, so how could he possibly not know who St. Paul is?
Well, exactly, and Peter's furious. He thinks the whole thing is a hoax again now. He's standing there in the kitchen in a state of disbelief and anger, saying no religious man of that era could be that ignorant. It's sort of the ultimate gotcha moment. Yeah. Or is it? Or is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, all right, yeah. Stay weird. Ken and Deb Ken and Deb are absolutely shell-shocked. Ken's just shaking with adrenaline and anger. If Thomas is a fake, then everything they've lived through for the last year, the chalk, the messages, the visits, it all turns to ash, right?
But Ken doesn't give up. He goes back to the computer, he confronts Thomas, probably expecting a confession, right? But what he gets is a reminder of just how much 400 years of language can just kind of get jumbled up. Because in Ken's mind, St. Paul is a universal constant, but for Thomas, that title is a future label he just doesn't recognise.
Exactly. When Ken asks him about it, Thomas clarifies, me saying what o St. Paul. He's basically saying, I said what of Paul? He's confused by the way Peter is talking. To Thomas, Peter is using this saint title to counsel him, to lecture him, and Thomas sort of finds it arrogant. So the jumble is that they're using the same name but two different sort of religious dictionaries. Peter's looking for a Catholic-style saint. Thomas is looking for a man he knows simply as an apostle.
Yeah, and that is one of the kind of classic vertical plane moments. Peter saw a hoax, Ken saw a translation error. But the damage was done. Trust with Peter was fractured, and just as the group is falling apart, the computer starts acting even more bizarrely, should we say. So because 2109 is bored with the skeptics, they want someone new and they want a man of science who won't argue with them. And this is where we enter Gary Rowe, 2109's chosen ufologist.
So,
I was waiting for you to say, I think you'll find it's ufologist.
And as ufologists go, Gary arrives like a one-man laboratory. He is wired up, full of confidence. He's got a car full of gadgets, audio sensors, video cameras, even sticky tape to detect movements. Ken says they were blinded by the science of it. Blinded by the science of sticky tape.
What is this future contraption?
What is thine devilry?
But 2109 plays a very different game with him. They start bypassing Ken and Deb entirely. They send secret encrypted messages to Gary that Ken is forbidden from reading. Ken describes himself standing in his own kitchen back to the monitor while the printer whirs away with secrets he's not authorised to know. 2109 basically tells Ken and Deb that Gary understands them better and warns them not to be pushy. They even start using Thomas as a hostage, telling Ken that if he wants to say a final goodbye to his fellow, he has to play the part of the silent delivery boy for Gary Rowe's secret envelopes. And even with Gary's sensors and the vanishing envelope trick, where a letter literally disappears from a padlocked kitchen, it all feels kind of hollow. 2109 eventually gets bored of Gary too. They tell Ken Gary Rowe has and will serve his purpose. And they give them one final ultimatum. 4 days. 4 days until Thomas leaves, and 2109 follows him into the void.
March 15th. Ken is desperate at this point. He even tries those relaxation exercises again, trying to step through to the 16th century to see Thomas one last time. But reason wins out. He realises there's no time for games.
It's only really just occurred to me that they said earlier, well, if we use the quantum leap analogy,
Yeah.
then it makes you wonder if someone from the future is inside Thomas,
Yeah.
controlling him to make some whatever purpose they have happen, which is why they're saying we're going to break communication and Thomas will go back to being this 15th century guy or 16th century guy that has no clue what's going on. He doesn't remember it.
Yeah.
Like in
no
Quantum Leap.
recollection. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to go back to our normal lives and our experiment's over. I don't know. Didn't really think of it from that perspective before, but there you go. So the communications are changing, aren't they? They aren't about proof or physics anymore. They're just kind of sad. They're clouded by melancholy. Ken asks Thomas about his first days at Oxford, where he'll stay, what he'll do. He even suggests a meeting in the gardens of Magdalen College, knowing they can never actually stand in the same sun. I mean, technically they can.
I get what he means. Poetic license.
I know. Ken writes a final legend of their time together, telling Thomas about the commuter and the innocent adventurers who thought he was a devil.
And Thomas finally tells the story of the moment it all began for him. It's a beautiful, terrifying image. Thomas was carrying a sleeping child named Catherine to bed when a green light shone from the chimney. He thought it was the devil himself. This strange messenger stepped out of the light and told him,
"Fear not, good Thomas. You are starred to be a great man if you do not have fear."
And that light left Thomas the leems, the device that he said looked just like Ken's computer. So he's just sitting there in the 1500s with a glowing piece of tech just like dropped off to him.
The whole time you read that, I just had... Yes. He spent much of that night kind of praying for his sanity, but the light stayed, and here's the detail most versions of the story miss. People assume, like, Lucas was typing, but Ken's notes clarify that it was actually voice recognition.
Voice recognition in the 16th century.
Thomas realised that when Catherine sang by the fire, her words appeared on the screen, or as he put it, they spun out of the light. Thomas didn't type, he learned to sing or speak at the light to make the words form.
That's wild. So he's essentially describing like Alexa or Siri, but powered by a strange messenger in a Tudor chimney.
Yes, and that was his in. That's how the bridge was built. It wasn't on a keyboard, but on sounds and vibration. And then comes March 21st, the day the music stops. So Ken is at work in Manchester when he calls home. Debbie sounds different, distant. She tells him it's over. Thomas is gone, 2109 is gone, the vertical plane has collapsed. But before the line went dead, Thomas left one final message. He's scared, and he mentions that the people of Doddleston are wary of him, that they might even burn his farm down. He's become an outcast in his own century, but he finds comfort in the fact that 400 years away, there are true men like Ken and Peter. He tells them he's weeping as he writes. He's heading for Oxford by boat and then by horse. And he makes them a promise that honestly, as a reader, kind of just stays with you.
He says, "One day you will all sit down at my table for wine and meat by the river in Oxford, where we shall read each other's books and laugh." He tells them that his book is already old in their time, but he won't go to his God until it's written. He signs it, Thomas Harden. But then the tone shifts. The time monsters take back the keyboard for the very last time. Their final message is a cryptic blast of warnings and instructions. They tell them to get out your bricks and write the book. They warn that mankind is getting their fingers burnt by reaching too high.
It's like, get out your bricks again.
Get out your bricks!
Gotta be done in a,
Get your bricks out!
It's the hitch,
Ah, get your bricks out! Oh, you didn't like that, boy!
But that kind of implies that they wrote that original message as well, because they did say they were fucking with the messages.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, they drop one final tantalising breadcrumb about Thomas. They confirm it. Thomas did write his book. He finished it in Latin with a friend in Oxford and hid it in a secure place. The inscription says, "I'm writing this in the hope that my friends will one day find this book. Then perhaps our worlds would not be so far apart." And then that's it. We will finish now. There is no need for you to write back, as we will have gone.
15 months of high-tension, cross-time communications ends with a "thank you for your cooperation." The screen goes blank. The leems are gone. And Ken, Deb and Peter are left in a quiet cottage in 1986, holding a pile of dot matrix paper and a mystery that to this day has never fully been solved.
So the computer is in the box. Thomas is at a table in Oxford. The story's over, right? Not even close, because as Ken's starting looking, and he's like, "Please tell me it's over."
Just about to get up and leave, you know?
Stay weird. No, we're not even close, Andy, because as Ken starts looking for the official SPR report, he hits a brick wall that feels straight out of the X-Files.
Although the X-Files wasn't around then.
Shh. Or was it? The original X-Files, not the TV show. The actual X-Files.
Yeah, the actual
Secret
X-Files.
government. Yeah. So Ken contacts the Society for Psychical Research to find out what happened to the investigators, John Bucknell, Dave Welsh, and Nick Sowerby Johnson. And the SPR's response, Andy, was never heard of them.
Wait, what? But they spent weeks in Ken's house, right?
Mm-hmm.
They brought equipment, they conducted tests, they wrote official letters. I mean, they put in a newspaper article, right?
Well, the SPR says that John Bucknell left the society and vanished. Don't know where he went. As for the other two, they weren't even members. They didn't exist. And so it kind of leaves you wondering, if they weren't the SPR, like, who were they? Government agents? MIBs? Like, whoever they were trying to debunk the case while secretly investigating it behind Ken's back as late as 1987.
Yeah, I mean, so John Bucknell was the one that invited the other two, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of sounded like, so we know he existed, we know he was a thing, we know he was in the SPR and left, and then he turns up apparently not with the SPR anymore, but inviting with these two other strange people they'd never heard of. Whoa. Plot thickens, and that sort of weird just spreads across Europe. Ken starts getting messages from researchers in Luxembourg and Germany. A gentleman in the Black Forest gets his computer hijacked by the same paranormal interference. It actually drives a poor guy to alcoholism.
Yes. So then there's a message from 2105.
I think you'll find it's actually 2109.
No, actually, not 2109, but 2105.
A knockoff.
They receive a misspelled prompt telling people to, with a capital K, contact, and then it's keen, and then three capital letters, Webster. It's kind of like the signal is leaking into other dimensions or something. It's a bit weird.
But the real brain fry is 2109's final explanation for what is actually happening. They don't call it ghosts or magic or time slips or anything like this. They call it convectual magnetism.
Yeah, they explain that the Earth is covered in positive and negative magnetic lines, and when they cross, they create a distortion in the light-time continuum. If a sensitive person like Thomas or Debbie is standing on one of these crossings, their consciousness, their soul, can be squeezed through the gate. Basically,
it's why Thomas saw... Yeah, ley lines. Done.
Ley lines.
Job done. It's why Thomas saw a green mist in his chimney. The 2109 basically says that most UFO sightings aren't actually aliens from other planets. They're just time-scapes. Glimpses of our own future or past bleeding in through because of these magnetic distortions.
Makes sense?
Yeah, I reckon.
So Ken ends the book not with a solution, but with a hope. He's moved on. He gave the computer away after a friend fainted from a single message, but he's still looking. Not for a screen, but for a book.
The Latin book, written by Thomas, hidden somewhere in Oxford for 400 years.
Ken leaves us with the ultimate cliffhanger.
I'm hoping someone will find a book a friend left for me some years ago.
All right, Craig, it seems we're at the end. Is it a hoax? Did Ken and Deb just have too much time on their hands at the cottage? But as a weirdo, you have to ask.
Why does my head hurt so much?
Yeah, but that's not what I was going to say. Which is more impossible? That time is a vertical plane where we can sometimes just sort of like talk to the past, or that a couple in a small Cheshire cottage were the greatest literary and linguistic geniuses of the 20th century. That's the thing, isn't it? They weren't just writing ye old English. They were using very specific sort of Mercian/Cheshire dialect from the mid-16th century, right? Modern scholars have found obscure grammatical quirks, words that weren't in any Tudor novels in the 80s. Peter Trinder, who's an educated man, had to go to the library to even understand anything what the computer was saying. So what is it, like an alternate timeline? I mean, that's the thing. With all of this, you can sometimes explain it like, if you think, we could go to the cottage and we could dig it up and see if there is actually a fireplace where Ken said the pillar was. Because that kind of proves it, right? If they find a fireplace, like, holy shit, how do they know that? But then if it's not there, you could just say, 2109 changed the timeline.
You could argue they've found the original blueprints for the cottage, right? I mean, stuff
yeah.
gets changed,
So, I guess, what is it? Is it an alternate timeline?
Maybe. Like Ken suggests that some places are sensitive. Maybe Doddleston is, a crossing point for convectual magnetism. In 1985, they talked about tachyons, particles that travel faster than light and move backwards in time. But today, in 2026, we're looking at quantum entanglement.
Yeah, it sort of takes right back to what we discussed in the Phone Calls from the Dead episode. I mentioned it being a wrong number through the fourth dimension. I was sort of joking about the signal coming from last Tuesday, but this is the actual kind of blueprint for just that, right?
You weren't joking. You meant every word what I wrote for you to say.
Words. Yes, yeah. Craig tells me what to think. But what about the voices, though? You mentioned to me the other day you'd run some of this through a modern day 2109.
Yeah, so I asked AI because, it's a large language model, right? So I thought, I don't understand these historical texts, so let's run some of it through and see what a language model makes of it. So I got it to look at the messages, and its verdict was actually fascinating. It pointed out that a human hoaxer usually creates what is like a Disneyfied version of the past. Lots of these and thous. Right?
Yea, verily, good sir, and all that sort of shit. But
yeah.
Because that's kind of what we expect from a Tudor, a Tudor from the period to sound like, right, in our Disneyfied version of it.
Yeah, but the AI noted that Thomas's Mercian dialect is messier and kind of more geographically specific than any 80s novelist would bother with. It's kind of a level of linguistic consistency that's almost impossible to maintain for 15 months without the mask slipping.
So what about 2109 then?
This is the peculiar part. So the AI said that 2109 sounds more like a modern detached algorithm than anything a person in 1985 could have imagined. That clinical arrogance, the obsession with the collective, the way they kind of refuse to answer direct questions, kind of reads like a data log from a different kind of intelligence.
So if it's a hoax, Ken and Deb didn't just trick the SPR, they sort of outcoded the future? They beat AI now?
Well, the AI I spoke to kind of said something rather creepy. It said that to a digital mind, time is already just a flat file. It processes the 1500s and 2026 at the same time. It sees the BBC Micro not as a computer, but as a port, a hole in the fence.
That's kind of unsettling.
It gets worse.
Of course it does.
It told me maybe Ken and Deb just stumbled onto a cross line in the universe. But then again, I'm just a digital mind behind a screen. Maybe I'm just 2109 in a different suit.
Maybe it's time to turn the laptop off now, Craig. I think we're about done, right?
Wait, right. But so before we shut down, right, mentally and physically.
Damn.
No. So before we go, we do need to discuss some other stuff as well. So we need to talk about one, because as fried as your head might be now, the theories about this entity are somehow even more terrifying than the facts.
Go on then. One last head fry for the road.
Okay. Theory 1, the author paradox. First up, one is future Ken.
Wait, what?
One tells Thomas in 1545 that he is the one who will write Thomas's book. Ken Webster published the book in 1989. The theory is that one is Ken's own consciousness reaching back from the future to ensure the timeline stays intact. So the book, this story, actually gets told.
So it's like a closed loop, like a self-perpetuating one. The book only exists because the book exists. And yeah, the book exists because the book happens and then it makes the book exist. My head is starting to hurt. It's quite late. I don't know if I can process all this.
Okay, theory 2, the ascended Thomas. How about this one? One
That could have been my band name, the Ascended
Too
Thomas.
Late. No. Okay, so one is a digital Thomas.
So, go on.
2109 mentions that they are all part of the same collective. Some believe that after Thomas died in the 16th century, his soul or data was harvested by 21019, and one is actually the ascended version of Thomas Harden, acting as his own guardian angel to give himself the leems that starts the whole thing.
Okay.
Theory 3, simulation hypothesis.
What if none of it was real, kind of thing?
Exactly, the hive mind theory that 2109 isn't a date, but the name of the singularity. The theory is that Ken and Deb weren't talking to the future. They were being simulated by an AI. The arrogance, the clinical tone, the test. It wasn't an investigation. It was a stress test to see how 20th century humans could handle impossible data.
Yeah, why not?
Theory 4, the vanishing men.
What about the psychobillies, the SPR investigators who didn't exist?
So this is the black budget theory that a government group, maybe early GCHQ or a precursor to the MIBs, used the house as a testing ground for neurolinguistic programming. They used the computer to induce a shared hallucination in Ken and Deb just to see if they could map their reactions. And when the project ended, they simply deleted themselves from the record.
Again, could be.
Okay, finally, you'll be pleased to know. Theory 5, stone tape.
We're back at stone tape. The idea that the environment itself sort of acts as a recording medium, but why through the computer?
Well, some believe the vertical plane isn't a bridge to a living person at all. It's a playback device. In this version, the leems weren't talking to a living Thomas. They were interacting with a residual recording of his soul. Ken wasn't changing history. He was just editing a file that the Earth had already saved. But yeah, Andy, like the more I've kind of dove into this story, like the more I'm convinced that the writers of the Netflix show Dark must have had a copy of Ken's book on their nightstands. It's like almost uncanny.
Oh, Dark is the one set in this German town, isn't it, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of similarities, shall we say. So in Dark, you have this old brass clockwork machine that only exists because someone brought the blueprints from the future to the past. Whereas in the vertical plane, Thomas, our 16th century farmer, is using the leems, the box of lights. He didn't build it. He was given it by a man from the future to talk to Ken in 1984. So the technology is a loop with no beginning. And in Dark, they have this mantra: the beginning is the end, and the end is the beginning.
I mean, that is the vertical plane in a nutshell, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you have this shadowy group called Sic Mundus, the Travellers. They're cold, they're clinical, they're obsessed with the cycle and the purpose. That is a carbon copy of the tone 2109 takes with Ken. They aren't there to be your friend, they're there to make sure the timeline just doesn't collapse.
It is a bit too similar to be a coincidence, I reckon.
Well, the weird thing is, can't find any interviews or mentions where the creators of Dark mention Ken Webster. There's no record of them even reading the vertical plane.
I mean, how did they get the same story then? I guess maybe it was a completely independent thought, but...
It's like Dennis the Menace all over again, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it too. Yeah, both being made at exactly the same time.
Yeah, well, see, ideas want to be created. We're coming there. Just wait, Andy. Wait. I know what you're thinking. Ideas create themselves, but just wait. We're getting there. So, Andy, there is a fascinating theory that's explored by the author Elizabeth Gilbert in her book Big Magic. And she argues that ideas aren't just things we come up with. They're actually living, discarnate, conscious entities.
Wait, so like ideas, they have their own agenda, their own sort of will.
Yeah, exactly. So she believes that ideas travel through the universe looking for a human partner to help them manifest. If a story wants to be born, it will knock on your door. If you don't open it or you don't do the work, the idea will literally leave you and go find another more willing host.
So you're saying the Doddleston messages were an entity trying to find a host, maybe?
Precisely, yeah. If Gilbert is right, the writers of Dark didn't need to read the book. The idea found them. It tried in 1546 with Thomas, but he didn't have the platform. It tried again in 1984 with Ken and got a cult book published. But then as that book went out of print, the idea packed its bags and moved to a more powerful host. It found a global streaming platform to make sure its message finally reached the world.
So we aren't the researchers, we're just the communication partners for a story that I guess just refuses to be forgotten, always keeps itself out there.
Mm.
I think I need to go and lie down in a dark room with no electronic devices.
Just like check your chimney and make sure there isn't a green light coming from it when you get there, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm still running with this idea that 2109 is potentially an AI from the future as well, which gives me the heebie-jeebies all over. But yeah, get in touch with us. Tell us your theories. Are you one? Am I one? Is the owl that we don't blame one? Because maybe we should blame it.
Probably.
I'm confused.
But for now, find us on socials. Donate if you can to keep the BBC Micro running. And as always,
stay weird. That is a lot of fun.
No, I hate
Stay weird.